Let's Set Green. I'm your host, Pooja Arvi. In this podcast, we focus on green business ideas, sustainable innovations. Each episode will have new story of such change makers and change making sector organization. And in today's episode, we have Madhurima, Chief Business Officer from Carbonlites. And just a brief introduction about Carbonlites is a company which helps reduce carbon emissions by converting wet waste into bio-CNG and organic fertilizers. As of now, the impact they have created is they have reduced or diverted totally 8,000 tons and more going into the landfills, and they have also replaced 33 lakh kgs of LPGs and more than 9,800 tons of CO2 emissions collectively. And that's quite a splendid numbers to have. And with this introduction, let's please welcome Madhurima to the show. Hi, Madhurima.
Hi, Pooja. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking this time out for us. If we have to see an overview of what is the fertilizer industry and what is the market size cap of it, I got some numbers which looks like this, which is rupees 94,210 crore is the total market size of India, and this number is pertaining from 2023. And also the reason for this number is including all the agricultural demands and strategic governmental interventions, everything collectively. So this is what the number we are getting. And if we are looking at, global market, like what will be the range, it looks like something around $202 billion US dollars. They give a anticipated prediction growth of CAGR 2.7%, ranging from presently 2024 to 2032. So now with this background, my question to you is, what do you think are the challenges to address the energy sector carbon emissions, also including the fertilizer industry? Like, what would be the total number of challenges which you will be faced in these industries?
Right. So if we look at just the energy and the agriculture sector, specifically in India, 67% of all emissions in India come from the energy sector, and that's followed by agriculture, which is at about 19 to 20% or so. So these are the two largest GHG emitting sectors we have currently. And of course, this is largely due to our dependence on coal. But if we look at just the energy sector right now, some of the biggest challenges in addressing emissions that come from the energy sector is largely the kind of infrastructure restraints or the economic constraints one can have, because transitioning into renewable energy can be expensive. The infrastructure by itself, whether it's setting up projects, whether it's let's say, for instance, if someone is buying CNG cylinders so that they can be using CBG, actually, compressed biogas versus LPG or diesel. That kind of infrastructure is expensive, but in the long term, investing in renewable energy is what's required to make our transition into clean energy. So that, I think, is a restriction or a challenge that most businesses can face into transitioning into cleaner energy. So that's one of the challenges. But I think largely one of the bigger challenges is that setting up a project like one of our projects, which is processing, 1,000 tons of wet waste on an annual basis, producing bio-CNG, producing organic fertilizer. These are extremely capital-intensive businesses. It requires a lot of capex to set up businesses like this. So that's so a lot of what I see is that there's limited investment, limited access to finances when someone needs to set up a project like this. Of course, there is the Satat scheme. There is a lot of encouragement from the government that's coming into the CBG sector right now. But when you look at impact funds, a lot of the impact funds are also focusing on asset-light businesses. While of course returns can be great with an asset-light business, at the end of the day, we are still running out of landfill space. Waste management in this country is extremely challenging. And at the end of the day, you do need solutions that can process the millions of tons of wet waste that sits in landfills today. And that honestly can only be solved through investing in renewable energy technology, even if it is capital intensive and these are one-time costs. So I think, so if I have to summarize, I would say these are the two biggest constraints. One is the constraint from someone who's adopting renewable energy, which is their infrastructure costs. And then it's someone who wants to set up projects and doesn't have the right access to the capital to set up projects like this. So that I would say is the challenge. So for energy specifically. So if we look at the fertilizer industry, we've been traditionally, so just to give you some context, in the year, just the last financial year, India spent over $13 billion, actually $18 billion on importing chemical fertilizers. And this is all for our fertilizer needs in the country. And that's for context in the sense of how much we're spending on imports versus how much we can actually produce locally.
In-house.
So, in-house. So locally produced organic manure. So of course, I'm not pitting an organic fertilizer versus a chemical fertilizer because they perform different functions itself. But projects like these can essentially reduce the need for importing excess chemical fertilizers. But of course, when the Green Revolution happened, chemical fertilizers are so heavily subsidized that farmers end up using more than what's actually required on their soil. So we're importing more chemical fertilizer than we actually need. And solutions like this, and we'll go into deeper on how we can produce products that can effectively not replace chemical fertilizers, but actually help a farmer reduce their consumption of chemical fertilizers. So I think one of the biggest challenges we face is while the chemical fertilizer industry has heavy subsidies, and the government, on the other hand, is trying to help farmers increase the amount of organic fertilizers we put. That's a very mixed message we're sending because we're spending money on the subsidies, but we're telling farmers to use organic fertilizers. And there are no subsidy schemes to help farmers in acquiring organic fertilizers, because that continues to create a misconception that organic fertilizers or manures don't work or it's not necessary. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And largely, however, I've spent about 4 years specifically in this sector, and I've seen a change. I've seen a change from farmers not willing to try an organic manure thinking it doesn't work to now being able to distribute across the region of Kolar, and just the region of Kolar has over 1 lakh farmers. So we've seen a genuine shift where farmers went from thinking it doesn't work to actually understanding that good organic fertilizers, enriched organic manures made in a certain manner can actually have a positive impact on the soil. So I think with the organic fertilizer industry, you have challenges being your competition, which is extremely low price, which is like a farmyard manure. It's very poor in quality, but you as an organic fertilizer that's a more premium product is constantly compared with something like that. But also the fact that you're competing in an industry where chemical fertilizers are heavily subsidized and we don't have those kind of subsidies. So I think those are, off the top of my head, some of the biggest challenges in the fertilizer industry.
Yeah, I think you gave an overall understanding from different perspectives to look at it from finance, from government policies, and also in-ground challenges related to infrastructure arrangements, which is required to have this whole setup, on the ground running. So, one more point to what you were saying before, right? The one particular policy which you mentioned, that can you just elaborate more on that?
Satat is basically a program that was started. It's basically sustainable alternatives for transport. That's a program that was started by the government to help incentivize people to set up CBG plants. And so their aim is to set up 5,000 CBG plants by 2050. And they're basically helping with financing. But this largely with the Satat scheme is where they set up bio-CNG plants largely for transport. So once someone sets up a CBG plant, then they have off-take partners. They work with, let's say, like a BPCL or an HP petrol bunk or that have CNG units as well, where they can off-take the energy that the CNG or the CBG that you're producing. So in grid, basically. So they have grids that are set up so you can directly produce the organic, so you can produce the CBG and ingest it directly into the grid. So that's the Satat scheme that I was talking about. Like I said, that's largely focused on transportation, in decarbonizing the transportation industry itself.
Okay.
But however, CBG can be applied across. So we are currently using it to decarbonize not just the transportation sector, but also the cooking sector. Actually, we have a model where we bottle the CBG, we purify it, and then we compress it into bottled cylinders. And these cylinders are used to replace LPG in kitchens and restaurants, in industries where LPG is being used for not just cooking but also heating purposes.
You are also looking into this cooking values, right? So in cooking point of view, like the feasibility is what matters, right? The packing wise and how you deliver it and how the whole all the system is managed. Do you think the ease with which this local market has been already set up for the LPG cylinders which exist right now can sustain some portion of it coming from CBG?
Absolutely, because so we've been in this for the last 6, 7 odd years now. Of course, when we started off initially, there are challenges, and I'll be very candid about the challenges. Is the fact that the cylinders are much bigger than LPG cylinders, so they're similar to oxygen cylinders that you will see, and they come in a cascade that has either 2 or 4 cylinders, and they can be heavy. They're over 400 kgs in weight. So one of the challenges that we face is that we can onboard a customer that has a bigger gas tank where they can actually store this. But while that initially started off as something that could have been a challenge, has quickly turned into not such a big challenge today, because we currently have over 30 customers, 30 to 50 customers actually across Karnataka, Telangana, and Tamil Nadu. And the reason why we see that it's working is the fact that in terms of cost, we're about 5% lesser than LPG costs. So apart from that, because there are obvious advantages of CBG when compared to LPG. Of course, it's carbon neutral, so that's an obvious fact. So when you burn CBG, whatever carbon dioxide emissions are released, they don't add to climate because it's biogenic. So it's a fully carbon neutral fuel. It's 5% lesser in cost when compared to LPG. It's also it's in a fully gaseous state when compared to LPG, which needs to be liquefied, which means that because it's in a fully gaseous state, you end up having 100% consumption. So there is no wastage. So generally, when you see restaurants, and I don't know if you've observed this, but when you're at a commercial restaurant and they're using LPG cylinders, when the cylinder is almost empty, they put the cylinder in a tub of hot water, they put some hot towels on top of it to gasify the last 20 grams that's left at the bottom of the cylinder. That's extremely inefficient, but also extremely dangerous. But that's something that you don't face with compressed biogas because it's fully gas. It doesn't need to be liquefied. So one ends up using 100% usage of the gas that's produced. With LPG, there is always around 5 to 10 grams that's wasted at the bottom of the cylinder. Another obvious advantage is that it has a higher calorific value than LPG does. So the burning is extremely
efficiency
efficient.
of burning would be more efficient.
Yeah, exactly. Efficiency is much better because the calorific value is greater, and it's also packed at very high pressures. So an LPG cylinder is at like a 3 bar, 4 bar pressure, but this is packed at like a 160 bar pressure, which means that a customer can actually choose. It comes with a pressure reducing system, so customers can actually choose what pressure they want based on the type of cooking they're doing. So let's say if they're doing something like a Chinese cooking where they're using a wok that requires a higher pressure, they can increase the pressure. If they don't need higher pressure, they can decrease the pressure. So this also allows for very efficient usage of the gas itself. And because they're able to use 100% of the gas, at the end of the month, they're able to actually save 15 to 20% on their energy bills because they're getting more value out of using a full gas versus an LPG. So I would say that it's playing very well in the market today. In fact, I think the challenge is that we're unable to meet the energy demand. So we need more biogas plants that can be set up that can produce more CBG to cater to the needs of growing cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad that have so many restaurants that you can potentially turn into carbon neutral restaurants.
Yes, given the high calorific value and the easy adjustments or tweaks which you can make in usage of gases, I think these factors will be an edge or override the pros in this usage of CBG. Whereas unlike in the normal conventional cylinders which we are already getting, I think that we can focus more on, like where it helps the restaurants where their energy demands is more on everyday basis. They can make use of this kind of alternatives in more so that we will have more less amount of carbon dioxide emissions coming up. So now let's see if we have to understand more deep dive into organic fertilizers. What is the actual role of organic fertilizers from biogas and how does it affect the soil fertility? What is the relationship?
So if we look at soil health in India, it's depleted drastically over the last 30 to 50 years. Soil organic carbon is an extremely important component in deciding soil health, the soil fertility. Ideally, healthy soils are supposed to have anywhere between 2 to 5% of soil organic carbon. Indian soils today have 0.3%. Anything less than 0.5% is actually considered to be deserts. So food security concerns are actually very real. We have only a few harvests left before food security becomes a real concern. So, and organic fertilizers, not just organic fertilizers from biogas plants, but organic fertilizers are extremely important components in improving soil organic carbon. And that's decided by the quality of the organic fertilizer itself. So better the soil organic carbon, better your soil health, better your soil health. Obviously, the probability of you continuing farming practices for years together, the probability of that is much higher. So in terms of the role that organic manures can play in soil fertility, if you ask me, it's a very important role because that's what brings the soil organic carbon. So if you look at the role of what chemical fertilizers play, chemical fertilizers, the predominant role of a chemical fertilizer is not to improve your soil health. It's to improve plant yield. So very simple way to understand is chemical fertilizers work on your plant and organic fertilizers work on your soil. So, which is when we come into regenerative agriculture practices and not organic farming, this is exactly what regenerative agriculture advocates for. It doesn't advocate for stopping the use of all chemical fertilizers. No, because they serve completely different functions. You use the chemical fertilizers for improving your plant health, improving your plant yield, and you use the organic manure to improve your soil health. Because without soil health, without soil organic carbon, over a period of time, all that we're doing is to add your chemical fertilizers that act on plant yield. We're only depleting the soil of its nutrients. And after a point, there are no nutrients left in the soil if we're not replenishing nutrients back into the soil. And the only way you can do that is by adding an organic manure back into it. So the role of organic fertilizers in improving soil health is imminent. And specifically with organic fertilizers, the reason I stress on this that comes from a biogas plant is largely because if you look at the way we make an organic fertilizer, generally organic fertilizers go through aerobic composting, which is in the presence of air. But when organic fertilizers generated from a biogas plant, the advantage is that they go through anaerobic decomposition as well as aerobic in the absence of oxygen as well as in the presence of oxygen. So just to quickly dial it down, so when we get wet waste to our processing facilities, it's crushed initially, it's crushed in the presence of some fresh water. We feed that into digesters along with our dung. When it's fed into the digester, it's in the digester for a period of 30 to 35 days where the biogas generation happens. Once the biogas is generated, then it's purified, it's compressed, and it's bottled. But the byproduct of making biogas is an extremely enriched, composted, liquid fermented organic manure. It comes out in the form of a slurry. Traditionally, the slurry has always been treated as an effluent. Most biogas plant owners think it's an issue, so they release it back into the drain. But without realizing the kind of positive impact it can have on soil health. So once it comes out as a liquid fermented organic manure, that's the anaerobic decomposition process I was talking about, in the absence of oxygen where the biogas is being generated. So 97%, only about 3% to 4% is your biogas generation. The
One more
97%
point.
is your slurry.
Yes, in the slurry, I think the aversion towards this slurry might also be due to this reason, right? It produces various amount of obnoxious smells when this slurry is produced. I think is that the reason why people are not understanding its value, rather letting it out as an effluent?
No, because see, the thing is, everything boils down to how segregated your wet waste is.
Okay.
Of course, if you're taking wet waste with plastic and putting everything into the digester, obviously what you're producing is not high quality. We work with waste management partners or with municipalities. We are not a waste management company, so I want to make that very clear. We're a carbon management company. We're in the business of the designing of the biogas plants, the construction, the operations and maintenance, the technology for this, and how you basically produce the products and market that. So the wet waste comes to us fully segregated, else it's not accepted at the facility. Of course, if the wet waste is not fully segregated, then you're at a risk of producing something that's toxic. But also the liquid fermented organic manure, because it goes through anaerobic digestion, it's already been composted for a period of 40 days. So it's a fully composted manure that actually you can apply directly into the soil.
Okay.
And to give you some understanding, liquid fermented organic manure was included in the fertilizer control order in July of 2022. So it's because it's been included in the fertilizer control order and it's been recognized by the central government as an effective soil conditioner. It's something that can be used. Of course, there are some challenges where you use it during land preparation versus how other organic fertilizers are used. But even so, once the liquid fermented organic manure is produced, we actually use that. We enrich heaps of biomass. So biomass can be like agriculture waste or dried leaves and branches. We mix that with the biomass. We compost that again for another 60 days or so. Once that's fully decomposed, we sieve it. We have a winter composting method. Sieve that, and then we add a biofertilizer consortia, and that's when it's ready for use in farms. So that's what I talked about, where it goes through anaerobic decomposition, then it goes through aerobic decomposition at the end of the day, and it goes through enrichment. So at the end of the day, you are producing an organic fertilizer that has a minimum of 18 to 20% organic carbon. And that type of organic carbon is extremely beneficial in improving your soil health. And because we also use organic biofertilizers that improve the soil health as well, improves the plant uptake of nutrients from the soil, overall you're using a product that's super beneficial. Not just improving soil health, but we have farmers who are actually seeing differences in yield within 30 to 45 days of using it.
Efficiency, and also I would say the overall soil health, apart from maintaining the plant health, which are two different advantages or catering into two different needs. I think that is one point where the farmers have to be educated enough to make a very optimal choice, wherein they know how much is needed to maintain the soil fertility, and as well as not including but not limited to use of this, and also having a portion of chemical fertilizers, which is just how much ever what is needed for that particular crop. For this, I think it will take some time for them to adjust and go through this overall change of these two parameters and their functionalities. Okay, let's move ahead. So my point is now, just now you explained what happens in Carbonlites in a brief way of this anaerobic and then aerobic digestion, and then how you are adding the consortia of to enrich the overall fertilizer units, right? Can you please walk through us the whole journey of how does Carbonlites look like and what happens inside Carbonlites?
Just to clarify, Carbon Masters is the name of the company. Carbonlites is the brand. So
Yes.
The products that we produce are marketed under the brand name Carbonlites. So in very brief, we basically set up biogas projects, CBG projects, in collaboration with waste management partners or with municipalities. So our focus is in setting up city and state level projects that can process the wet waste generated by an entire city or by a state. So Once we partner with a waste management company, we do the designing, the construction, the operations and maintenance of a biogas plant. And once we commission and set that up, we also brand and market the two products, which is the biogas as well as the CBG as well as the organic fertilizer. So the wet waste comes to us fully segregated. The waste management partners essentially work with, let's say, a VVMP that is picking up waste from households, but they all have a source segregation policy. And then the waste management partners as well picking it up from bulk waste generators like an IT complex or an apartment complex that has over 30,000 households. So it's source segregation. They pick up fully segregated wet waste from the households. They take it to a transfer station. It's again segregated. Then it's brought to our CBG units. So once it's brought to our units, there's another level of manual segregation that happens just to make sure that only organic waste is fed into the digesters. It's crushed in the presence of fresh water. We crush it, and then it's made into like a paste-like consistency, and then it's gone into the digester. So in the digester, it stays for about 30 to 35 days. The biogas is produced. The biogas is then trapped, and then it's purified to remove any impurities like hydrogen sulfide and moisture. And once it's purified, it's compressed and then it's bottled into cylinders. So we have varying capacities of cylinders like a 24 meter cube or 36 meter cube cylinders. So it's bottled into these cylinders, and then we have a daily delivery model where it's shipped to our customers across wherever our manufacturing units. So then, like I said, once we produce the biogas, the byproduct of making the biogas is the liquid fermented organic manure. The liquid fermented organic manure is then taken, it's enriched. The biomass we get, which is agriculture waste, is something that we don't use for the production of biogas. So that's used to enrich the biomass. We mix the liquid fermented organic manure on the biomass. We compost that using a windrow composting method where we maintain heaps that are about 7 to 8 feet tall. The temperatures are more than 60 to 65 degrees, so no weeds or pathogens survive. Composted over a period of 45 to 60 days. It's sieved multiple times using a 4 sieve, and then the product is enriched with a biofertilizer consortium. This biofertilizer consortium we get from our partner company that has a patented way in which they make the biofertilizer. So they have a contamination-free way of making the biofertilizers. Then we enrich that. It's packed into a 40 kg bag before we dispatch it to farmers. So that's how we make the two products. We're right now expanding the agriculture vertical where we're releasing a bunch of different products, because apart from just soil health, farmers experience so many challenges with root absorption, with pesticides, with fungicides. So we're launching another whole range of products that can also cater to the other challenges that farmers face.
Yeah, I think because there will be varied amount of percentages like for each plant. Each crop will have different percentages of absorption capacity from the soil or the nutrient from the soil. I think that can also be a big problem. If you are focusing on solving that, like into different products, like what would that be? And also you mentioned one more point, like this bioenzyme or this consortium which you get from, is it still the same across the same lines how you are planning to do? Like you will collaborate with other partners and then segregate and navigate these issues around these lines?
So biofertilizer are essentially microbes. Microbes
Yes.
have to be made in a lab.
Yeah. Yes.
Where we have some amount of, we have a small lab that we partner with and of course when you're in the sector of producing biogas, but also you're producing products for agriculture, you need to be partnered with a lab that can do regular tests of the product to make sure there's a batch-wise testing. So we've partnered with a lab, we have a local lab that we partner with who does the regular testing for all of our organic fertilizers. But also, like I said, have a patented technology in the way they produce the biofertilizers. So they actually have a Toricell technology that uses disposable bags to produce the biofertilizers. They're essentially microbes that's produced in the lab, and microbes that help when you put it back into the soil, they eat the organic matter, help the plants uptake the nutrients better. So that's the function of biofertilizer. So Of course, it's not made in the same way. There's no waste that's required to make a biofertilizer. If that's what you're asking. But it's made. There's a mother culture that you acquire, and then you use the mother culture to develop different types of microbes. So, and then you make it into a consortia. So there are, let's say, different types of microbes. So there's nitrogen solubilizing bacteria, there's phosphorus solubilizing bacteria, there's potassium solubilizing bacteria. So that's your NPK consortia. Then we also use something called mycorrhiza fungi that helps help the root absorb nutrients in a much better manner. So those are the type of microbes that we use. So different types of issues require different types of microbes. So and then you sort of make them individually and then make a consortia that you can add into a product and then we use in agriculture. So while right now we add microbes for NPK as well as mycorrhiza fungi, we're also looking at microbes right now that can help improve root absorption, that can help improve the immunity of the soil itself, and then eventually go into biopesticides and biofungicides. So it can essentially help the plants ward off pest attacks or help deal with the pest attacks by using like an organic way of dealing with it.
You explained it really well, Madhurima. Thank you so much for that. And moving ahead, I would like to know, since you have spent good amount of time and you are SME in this subject, I would like to ask few points. If you can give, let's say, 3 takeaways for any upcoming or new entrepreneurs who are looking to work in this bio-CNG and agriculture, regenerative agriculture sector, what would that be?
I think if there's ever a time to transition into climate, it would be now. So I think my biggest piece of advice is do it now. And I think there is again a misconception that for anybody who's looking to transition into sustainability or climate, there's a misconception that the current skills they have right now is not something that can be used. But one of the best things that I've seen evolving in the industry that anything can be made into a combination. That's climate and finance. Climate and sustainable agriculture, climate smart agriculture, whether it's accounting and climate, whether it's communications and climate, whether it's design and climate. Irrespective of the skills you have today, it's all applicable. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is to not overthink, but just transition. This is the decade for climate. All investments going from any impact funds are going into climate. So if there's any projects that's happening right now in the impact space, it's in this decade where most of the climate businesses are not only being most people starting climate businesses, but also raising the funds that's required to run these climate businesses. So like I said, it's the decade for climate. So transition now if you have to. So I think that's the piece of advice I would have.
Yeah, I think you rightly mentioned about how people, dwell upon thoughts thinking that they don't have right kind of skill set to fall into this category or the right if they want to work anything related to climate sector. So even I have my one point of view towards this, which is like there is nothing as climate related and there is nothing as such which doesn't fall into this category. I would explain why. That is because, let's say, if you are a person who is from academic background and you have, more master towards your commerce skills or commercial skills or let's say even finance aspects of it, you can always look at how sustainable you can make with all the operations which you are already performing, and that itself is a climate related job. And if you go into any other sector, let's say if you're working into like agriculture or if you're working in other industry of agriculture, let's say like permaculture, designing aspects of it, architecture aspects of it. So anything and everything which you can do, and if you can understand what is required, and if you have that capacity in you to build new solutions or upgrade in such a way where you are causing less impact and more positive effect that itself is contributing to the climate change and of course climate jobs as well. So that was just one pointer from my side as well. And Madhurima, now that you mentioned that starting now is the big takeaway which you would like to give to the listener here. Now that can you also tell us this regenerative agriculture, how is it scoping and what exactly is regenerative agriculture?
So, it's essentially the type of practices that were followed by Indian farmers decades before. But of course, over the Green Revolution, that's drastically changed because of the amount of chemical fertilizers that we started importing. What regenerative agriculture suggests is that you reduce the amount of chemical fertilizers that you're using, increase the amount of organic manure that you're using in the soil. It's basically all activities that's targeted at improving your soil health, but in a manner that does not reduce your crop yield. That's the aim of regenerative agriculture practices. How it's different from organic farming is that it doesn't say that you shouldn't be using chemical fertilizers. So it's a combination of both. There are specific practices under regenerative agriculture practices that qualify. Like I said, to reduce the amount of chemicals that you're using. So let's say there are crop specific recommendations on chemical fertilizers. So generally your NPK is supposed to be like for 2:1:1 or 4:2:2. But generally farmers end up using much higher ratios than actually that's required. So like an 8:4:4. So much more than what's actually required. So what it suggests is to reduce the amount of chemical fertilizers. If you're using 4 bags or 3 bags of DAP per acre of land, reduce that by maybe 25%. Or 50% and use 1 bag of urea per acre. Increase the amount of organic manure that you're using, whether it's farmyard manure, try and get a better source of farmyard manure, higher quality of farmyard manure, essentially an organic manure that has higher amount of organic carbon. Use biofertilizers to increase the efficacy of the microbes that's already existing in your soil itself. To practice things like crop rotation and multi-cropping. When farmers continue to grow the same crop throughout the year on that piece of land, every crop has certain type of a nutritional requirement. So when you grow the same type of crop all year round, that crop takes the same type of nutrients from the soil and then your soil becomes deficient of those kind of nutrients or macronutrients. All crops need NPK, but there are different types of micro and macronutrients that the crops require. Let's say when you grow just carrots, and carrots need a certain amount of zinc or a certain amount of boron, and you keep only growing that, your soils then become deficient of zinc and boron and your other micronutrients. So this essentially suggests that you practice, multi-cropping and do a bit of crop rotation as well. And also essentially suggests that you not stop tillage, but you reduce the amount of tillage. Because essentially when farmers till their soils, you're releasing carbon that's trapped in your soil back into the atmosphere. So to reduce the amount of tillage that they're using, that they're currently doing. And also another practice that farmers should essentially follow to come under regenerative agriculture practice is to practice a form of using their agriculture waste that's generated from growing each crop. So let's say when you're growing a paddy, each acre of land generates about 1 ton to 2 tons of, let's say, stubble, your paddy straw. To instead of burning that stubble or paddy straw, turn that into organic manure. So use your agriculture waste to turn it into organic manure. So these are some of the practices that if farmers are even doing 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 of these different types of practices, it all sort of feeds back into improving the soil organic carbon, improving the soil's texture, improving the water retention capabilities. That essentially is regenerative agriculture. It's to sort of have a balance in practice. It's to essentially trap the carbon in the soil rather than releasing the carbon back into the atmosphere and increase the carbon we put back into the soil.
So if I have to summarize this, it's mostly to increase and enhance the ecosystem, and then also to support the biosequestration which will happen in a way as a result of following this, and to
Yeah.
make more resilient soil capacity wherein you don't deplete or completely overuse one of the macro or micronutrients so that the soil loses its strength and as well as its nutrient value. That I think
Right.
nowadays it is most important for us to look how the carbon is coming back into the soil, because the cycle, which is mostly we have to work on that as well, I feel, right? Improving the whole water cycles and the nutrient cycle for soil, where the constantly the soil is subjected to various crops. That can be one suggestion, as you rightly mentioned, or having some different kind of, let's say, combination of crops and trees, and having those kind of alternative small arrangements can help them in the long run to maintain the soil fertility overall. And thank you so much, Madhurima, for being with us and having patiently explaining us with a few examples where everyone can understand, even the person who doesn't know the nuances of this sector can now understand. I feel with your explanation was being so brief, and also with exemplary examples which you gave for each example was quite splendid. Thanks a lot for that. And almost we are end of this. So the three mantras for sustainable life are reduce, reuse, and recycle. If you like this episode, please let us know your thoughts and insights about the episode. And I'm also on Instagram. You can follow me at getsetgreen.in for any updates. If you have any questions related to Madhurima or how their products have been done, I will put all the links in the description. Please check out their website and you can reach them out if any further clarification needed. Thanks a lot. That's it for today. See ya.